Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you to picture a very specific, very common moment of panic. You know the one.
Oh, I think I do.
Yeah, so you're at your desk. You're typing an email maybe to a client, maybe a boss, just someone you really need to impress. You're typing fast, the ideas are flowing, and you get to the end of a sentence, and you type, "This is the strategy we should stick with."
And then you freeze.
Exactly. You totally freeze. You just stare at that last word. With. And this little alarm bell goes off in your head.
It's the voice of your 10th grade English teacher.
Yes. Or a fussy college professor just whispering in your ear, you cannot end a sentence with a preposition.
Ah, the dreaded preposition stranding.
Yeah.
It's the grammatical equivalent of wearing white after Labor Day. Or at least that's what we've all been told.
Right. So you panic, you delete the sentence, you start doing mental gymnastics to fix it, you change, this is the strategy we should stick with, to this is the strategy with which we should stick.
With which we should stick.
And suddenly you sound like a Victorian butler who's trying very hard to be polite but secretly hates you.
Huh. You really do. It creates this incredibly stiff, unnatural distance. And yet, people do it every single day because they're absolutely terrified of breaking a rule.
Well, today's the day we officially break the rule.
I am ready for it.
We're jumping into a stack of sources today, specifically some great excerpts from 14 and some fascinating linguistic history that essentially give everyone listening permission to just tell that inner English teacher to quiet down.
Because if you actually look at the history, this rule is much less about correct grammar and a lot more about a weird centuries-old case of linguistic insecurity.
Linguistic insecurity. I
Yeah.
like that phrasing. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack why we think this is wrong, who exactly told us it was wrong, and why strictly following this rule actually makes us worse at communicating.
It really does.
But before we get to the 17th century culprits, we have to talk about the most famous clapback in grammar history. You know the one I'm talking about.
I assume you were referring to the famous Winston Churchill story.
The legend himself. I mean, it's basically the Avengers Endgame moment for grammar nerds.
It is an absolute staple.
Yeah.
So the story generally goes that Churchill, who was obviously a master orator, drafted a memo or speech during the war, and an overzealous editor went through it and found a sentence ending in a preposition, a with or an at or a for.
And the editor, clearly not knowing who he was dealing with, circles it and rearranges the sentence to move the preposition to the middle. He makes it proper.
Right. And Churchill, upon seeing this supposed correction, scribbles a note in the margin. The most famous version of the quote is, "This is the sort of bloody nonsense up with which I will not put."
Huh? Up with which I will not put. I love it so much. It's aggressive, but it's also just a perfect linguistic joke.
It really is. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news right at the top of the deep dive, but our sources indicate that this story is almost certainly apocryphal.
Oh, man. I knew you were going to say that. Why do historians have to ruin all the good stories?
I know. The earliest records of the joke actually don't mention Churchill at all. It's been attributed to various people over the decades. But, and this is the crucial part, the fact that Churchill likely didn't say it doesn't make the underlying point any less valid.
Right, because the joke works regardless of who actually penned it. Let's actually dissect why it's so funny. Up with which I will not put. It sounds completely ridiculous. It sounds like Yoda having a stroke.
Exactly. And the reason it sounds so incredibly disjointed highlights exactly why the rule itself is flawed. The phrase they were using is put up with. That is a phrasal verb.
Phrasal verb. And let's unpack that term for a second, because this seems like the key to the whole argument.
It is the absolute key. In English, we have thousands of verbs that are made up of two or more words. Think of things like give up, or log in, calm down,
Yeah.
put up with.
Right.
These words, despite being physically separate on the page, function as a single unit of meaning.
Yeah, give up means surrender. You can't just separate give and up without totally losing the meaning of the word. Like if I say up which I gave, it means literally nothing.
Precisely. The up isn't really functioning as a directional preposition in that context. It is part of the verb itself. So when you force the rule of never end a sentence with a preposition onto a phrasal verb, you are taking a hatchet to the verb's actual DNA. You're splitting the atom of the word.
And that's why up with which I will not put sounds so insane. You've taken put up with, which just means tolerate, and you've scattered its body parts all across the sentence.
You have destroyed the semantic unit just to satisfy a syntactic rule. You've sacrificed meaning for the appearance of propriety.
Wow. Sacrificing meaning for the appearance of propriety. That sounds like a lot of corporate emails I get, actually.
Right. It creates that uncanny valley effect in writing. You read the email, and you know what the words mean individually, but the structure feels totally alien. It just signals to the reader that you are prioritizing form over function.
So if this rule forces us to sound like malfunctioning robots, and if it literally breaks the mechanics of English verbs, where on earth did it come from? Who woke up one day and decided, you know what English needs? More arbitrary obstacles.
To find the primary culprit, we actually have to travel back to the mid-17th century.
The 1600s. Okay, I'm with you.
Specifically 1646. There was a schoolmaster and grammarian named Joshua Poole.
Joshua Poole. Okay, paint the picture for us. 1646 in England. The English Civil War is happening, right? King Charles I is fighting Parliament. It's a pretty chaotic time.
It is a time of immense chaos. And historically, when the world feels chaotic, people crave order. They want structure in any form they can get it. So Poole wrote a book called The English Accidents, and in it he argued that for language to be truly elegant, words should be placed in their natural order.
Natural with two L's, I assume?
Of course, two L's.
Yeah.
And to Poole, this natural order meant that the preposition must always precede or go before the noun it governs.
Okay, so he's saying if I have a normal sentence like, what is he good for? The word for is governing what? So it should really be, for what is he good?
Exactly. He viewed what is he good for as sloppy and vulgar. He wanted the structural tidiness of, for what is he good?
But for what is he good sounds like a line from a really bad fantasy novel. For what is he good, my lord? He is good for slaying dragons. Like, nobody actually talks like that.
The secret is they didn't really talk like that in 1646 either. That's the funny part. Poole was prescribing a rule that didn't match the reality of how English people spoke. But he wasn't alone in this crusade. A few decades later, the famous poet John Dryden joined the fight.
John Dryden. Big name in poetry.
Huge name. And Dryden essentially became the self-appointed guardian of the English language. He went on this massive crusade against what he called preposition stranding. He even went so far as to publicly critique the ancients, the writers who came before him.
When you say the ancients, who exactly are we talking about?
We are talking about the Elizabethan heavyweights, Ben Jonson, and yes, William Shakespeare.
Wait, Dryden is correcting Shakespeare's grammar. That takes some serious confidence. Hey, Will, nice play, loved Hamlet, but you ended a sentence with in Act 3, so I'm giving it a B-.
That is essentially what he did. In one of his essays, Dryden explicitly complains that Ben Jonson, and by extension the other playwrights of that era, had a common fault of placing the preposition at the end of the sentence. He thought it was terribly unrefined.
That's so funny because Shakespeare is celebrated for capturing the actual human voice, the flexibility of English, and Dryden is looking at that exact flexibility and saying, no, that's a bug, not a feature.
But here is the delicious irony, and the sources make a really big point of this. Dryden actually admitted that he himself struggled with this rule.
Oh, really? He couldn't even follow his own rule?
Yes. He confessed that he would often write a sentence naturally, ending it with a preposition, and then he would have to go back during the editing phase to correct it. He was actively fighting his own native language instincts.
That is so telling. If the guy popularizing the rule can't even follow it naturally, maybe the problem isn't the writer. Maybe the problem is the rule itself.
Exactly. And this begs the question, why were Poole and Dryden so obsessed with this? Why did they think, for what is he good, was objectively better than what is he good for? Because it wasn't just a random preference.
Right. They didn't just flip a coin one day. What was the standard they were trying to meet?
The standard was Latin.
Latin. The ghost that haunts every English class.
We call this Latin envy. You have to remember, for centuries, Latin was viewed as the absolutely perfect language. It was the language of the church, the language of science, the language of the Roman Empire. It was seen as logical, immutable, and divine.
So the logic was basically, if it works in Latin, it must be the correct way to do it in English.
Precisely. They wanted to elevate English. They wanted to gentrify the language, essentially. And in Latin, the grammar is totally different. In fact, the word preposition comes from the Latin prepositio, meaning placed before.
So the name literally tells you where it's supposed to go.
In Latin, yes. But here is the massive technical mismatch that Poole and Dryden completely ignored. Latin is an inflected language.
Okay, inflected. Break that down for us.
Right. So in an inflected language, the role of a word in a sentence is determined by its ending its suffix. You can move words all around in a Latin sentence, and it still makes perfect sense because the endings tell you who is doing what to whom. But prepositions in Latin govern specific cases, so they are physically tightly bound to their nouns. You generally cannot separate them.
Okay. So in Latin, the structure physically demands that the preposition stays right with its object.
Right. But English is primarily a Germanic language. It doesn't rely on complex word endings to make sense. It relies on word order. And as we discussed earlier, it relies heavily on those phrasal verbs. Put up with, check out, log in. Latin doesn't have phrasal verbs.
So they were basically trying to apply the rigid rules of a Romance language to a messy Germanic language. It's like trying to apply the rules of chess to a game of football. Hey, you can't tackle him. Bishops only move diagonally.
That is a fantastic analogy. They were looking at a rugged, highly flexible Germanic language English and trying to force it into a tailored Roman toga. It just doesn't fit.
And the tragic result is that we've spent 400 years walking around in a toga that doesn't fit, just tripping over our own sentences.
And judging each other for it. That is the worst part. It became a class marker. If you ended a sentence with a preposition, it was seen as a sign of poor education.
Even though, as we've clearly established, it's actually the more authentic English way to speak. So where does that leave us today? I assume actual linguists, the people who study the actual science of language, not just the 17th century poets, have a totally different take.
Oh, absolutely. The modern linguistic verdict is unanimous. Preposition stranding is perfectly grammatical. It has been a core feature of English syntax since Old English.
So the experts are completely on our side here.
Completely. In fact, linguists get incredibly frustrated by this zombie rule. There's a great anecdote in the source material about Jeff Pullum. He's a very prominent linguist and a co-author of the Cambridge Grammar of the English Language.
Which sounds like a textbook that weighs about 15 pounds.
It is massive.
Mm-hmm.
And Pullum writes for a popular blog called Language Log. Back in 2010, he evidently reached a breaking point. He got so tired of internet commenters smugly correcting people's prepositions that he posted a rant.
A linguist rant. I'm imagining a lot of very specific multisyllabic adjectives.
It was pretty hilarious. He jokingly threatened to kill anybody who posted a boring comment about prepositions on his blog.
Wow. Don't bring that weak preposition game to my comment section or I will end you.
Obviously, he was being hyperbolic about the violence, but the frustration is very real. Imagine being a biologist and having people constantly tell you that whales are fish just because a guy in 1646 said so. That is what it feels like for linguists.
That really puts it in perspective. They know the science, they know the deep history, and yet they just have to sit back and watch us all anxiously rewriting our emails to please a ghost.
It's the classic battle between prescriptivism and descriptivism. Prescriptivists, like Dryden, want to tell you how language should be, usually based on arbitrary rules or personal preference. Descriptivists like Pullum and modern linguists observe how language is actually used by native speakers.
And if native speakers have been naturally ending sentences with prepositions for 1,000 years, then that's the rule.
Exactly. Usage dictates grammar, not the other way around.
I feel like a massive weight has just been lifted. I can finally stop moving with to the middle of all my sentences. But let's make this practical for the listener, because knowing the history is great, but they still have to send that email to the boss who might be a total Dryden.
That is the reality check. Just because the rule is bogus doesn't mean people don't still believe in it and judge you for it.
So what do we do? If I write, this is the project I'm working on, and my boss corrects it to, this is the project on which I'm working, do I just send him a link to this deep dive?
You certainly could. But the better, maybe safer approach is to focus on clarity and flow. The main problem with the Latin rule is that it usually makes sentences incredibly clunky.
Yeah.
The project on which I am working sounds pompous. The project I'm working on sounds active, direct, and confident.
Directness wins.
Almost always. In modern business communication, we value efficiency and authenticity. We want to sound like humans, not legal contracts. So, my advice, trust your ear. If moving the preposition makes the sentence sound like a royal summons, just move it back to the end.
Trust your ear. I really like that. If it sounds like something a human would say, it's probably good grammar. If it sounds like a robot wearing a top hat, delete it.
A perfect rule of thumb.
You know, as we're talking about all this, about how we've all been blindly following a rule that makes no sense just because that's how it's always been done, it really makes me wonder about the bigger picture.
There is always a bigger picture.
Well, think about it. We're talking about Latin envy. We're talking about rules that were imported from a totally different system and forced onto us. How much of our everyday work life is just grammatical Latin envy?
Ooh, that is a fascinating provocation. You mean, What other rules are we following that don't actually fit our modern reality?
Exactly. Think about corporate structures. Think about the standard 9-to-5 workday that was invented for factories during the Industrial Revolution, yet we're still clinging to it in a digital, creative economy where it might not make any sense at all.
Or consider best practices. We absolutely love that term in business. But often, a best practice is just something a successful company did 20 years ago in a completely different market context.
Right. It's the business equivalent, Dryden saying Latin did it this way, so we must do it this way. We copy the form without understanding the actual function.
We adopt the rituals of success without understanding the mechanics of it. Just like we adopted the grammar of Latin without having the inflection.
That is profound. We are basically performing competence rather than actually being competent.
It is business theater. Writing the file for which you asked is business theater. It looks professional, but it's actually less effective communication. Sitting in a status meeting for an hour just because meetings default to an hour long, that's business theater.
So the challenge for you listening isn't just about grammar. It's about looking at your life, your work, your habits, and asking, am I doing this because it actually works? Or am I doing this because Joshua Poole told me to in 1646?
Identify the zombies. Identify the rules that are dead but still walking around eating your brain.
I love that. Kill the zombies. Strand the prepositions.
And don't be afraid to split an infinitive while you are at it, but that is definitely a deep dive for another day.
Oh, don't tease me. We will definitely save the infinitives for next time. Listeners, thank you so much for diving in with us today. Go forth, write those emails, and end your sentences however you please.
Within reason.
Within reason. See you next time.